Hello YouTubers, this is the noobifier, and welcome to the final installment of my streaming studio build log. The whole build, totally detailed from start to finish. Mission: to design and build a specialized room in the basement of our new house for YouTube content creation, streaming, and just to serve as a nice place to game from. Alright, so on to the actual build. I started by researching the parts and then Kyle did up an estimate of what would be needed. In total, 40 sheets of drywall and almost 100 2x4s were used to build a little room that's 10 feet by 12 feet. My friend Kyle offered his time to help me build the room. He's an experienced contractor and I have no professional contracting experience. His help was critical. He naturally knows how to build stuff that I would need to spend hours reading about. I know the final build was successful only because of him. The material was delivered on a Friday and I placed it in my garage. I prepared a space near the build and then moved everything downstairs. I wanted to do as much preparation before Kyle arrived so that he didn't waste any time. I started by inspecting the wall behind where I was about to build. Everything seemed quite legit, so I continued by installing a length of PVC pipe in the frame. The PVC pipe would be used after the room was finished to easily run wires in and out of the room. The easiest way to neutralize the sound and heat generated by a computer is to simply remote them somewhere else. A set of shelves was built at the end of the PVC pipe to get the systems off the floor. Just as a precaution, I blasted 2 cans of expanding foam on the pipe. The frame on the front wall was covered with drywall, and as you can see there was a piece of plywood that was used in the center of the wall. I'm going to elaborate on that pretty soon. The support joists that hold up the floor above me were packed with insulation. A bead of sound dampening compound called green glue was applied to the joist edge from a caulking gun. Green glue is a disgusting, messy, runny substance that likes to run and drip off of everything. The basic idea with the green glue is that whatever two things it's sandwiched between become isolated from each other. Green glue never fully hardens as it cures, so it's kind of like mounting your drywall on a rubber shock absorber. Some of the demonstrations online were really quite impressive. Once the green glue was allowed to set for a bit, the drywall was secured in place with drywall screws which sealed the insulation securely in place. Next, the rear exterior frame was built. All frames were secured to the floor with masonry screws and built as per normal with 16-inch stud spacing. The rear wall frame got another piece of plywood secured to it, and the remainder of the wall frame was covered with drywall. All the joints between sheets of drywall were either quickly fire taped or sealed with red carpet tape. There was no need to tape, mud, and sand these walls because they're going to get sandwiched inside the wall anyways. The next day I ran some electrical and some other simple prep work before Kyle came over. The wall frame was filled with rock wool and buttoned up with drywall. Rock wool is an insulation product that is both fireproof and denser than pink insulation. It's very easy to cut and fit where you need it, but it's also the most miserable product I've ever seen to handle. Next, the first layer of the left wall that would support the double door was built. Because the walls are basically two walls, an outer and inner door would be needed to properly isolate the room. We needed to wait for all 8 walls to be finished before setting the door into place. Now that the 4 exterior walls were complete, it was time to start framing the interior walls. These frames were set against the first wall but weren't secured to it in any way. This further isolated each wall and would further improve the wall's ability to block any noise. The inside wall would be finished exactly like the outside wall, and this composite wall is called a tri-leaf, which is basically drywall, frame drywall, frame drywall. When that was finally built, it was pretty easy to test the effectiveness of this construction style. Normally you can find a stud very easily just by tapping the wall. The finished double wall sounded very similar all the way down, regardless of where you tapped, making it very difficult to locate the stud. This was a huge relief because that proved that we were actually on the right track. The front and back walls of the room required some specialized framing to incorporate the skyline traps that were actually part of my noise control plan. The space for the trap was measured out and framed like a window. After the 4 interior walls were built against the exterior walls, it was time to place the doors. A single door would be a weak spot that I knew would let sound in. The room needed to be isolated for recordings, but it would also let me game at all hours of the night without disturbing anyone else in the house. Both door frames were hung left, so they would swing opposite to each other. The 2 frames were screwed together using some glue and some 2x1 MDF. 12 hours later, the glue had set and the doors were permanently locked together. The door frame was eventually level, set in place, and opened easily without any binding. I used at that time low expansion expanding foam to fill in the gap around the door. So now the only surface that was left was the second ceiling. The original plan for the inner ceiling was to run it on 2x4s that would run the short length of the room. Because the 2x4s would have to clear the beam, they would need an additional 5 inches below the beam, and that resulted in a ceiling that would have been 6 foot 1 inch. We soon decided that running a 2x4 in 14-foot length parallel to the beam as opposed to perpendicular would mean that we could set the height of the ceiling 4 inches higher. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's the difference between 6 foot 1 and 6 foot 5. This idea worked perfectly without compromising any component of the interior ceiling. The inner ceiling floats independent of the rest of the house on its own joists. So that means as people walk on the floor above, it's free to move without transmitting any of that energy directly into my ceiling. Also helping with the isolation, the gap between the two ceilings is also packed with a mixture of pink insulation and rock wool. At this point, we have 8 walls, 2 ceilings, and a double door. The room is physically built and truly isolated from the rest of the house. The walls were taped, mudded and sanded, and then painted. This was pretty much the same time that I started to work on the skyline traps. Throughout the build, on days where Kyle was unable to come over, I would work on the blocks needed for the trap. A skyline trap is a matrix of wooden blocks built in a pattern whose purpose is to scatter sound waves. It's really just a very cool looking echo-killing panel. I decided to steal an idea that I found on the internet and build them countersunk into the wall. The room is quite small, so I didn't really like the idea of hanging a skyline trap on the wall like a piece of art. And I won't lie, I actually thought it would look pretty badass. Originally the traps were going to be 2 foot by 3 foot. Before construction I plotted what that was going to look like, and they would be entirely too small. It was going to be impossible to extend them in the future, so at that time I decided to double them in size to 2 foot by 6 foot. That meant that rather than 700 blocks, it would need 1400. I could not have anticipated how much time that would actually soak up. I decided to build it out of 2x2 pine because the material was very cheap and quite easy to find. I'm totally happy and relieved to say that the final traps actually attenuate echo better than I expected. Each block was cut, then sanded, and then stained. Sanding took off any markings and took the loose edges off the wood, then prepared the wood for stain. There were 4 types of blocks ranging from 1 inch to 4 inch in length. Each block length was stained a different color and put into a separate bin to dry. I want to say at this time that if you plan on building a large trap for your own room, be warned, it's going to soak up an entire weekend for sure. The skyline trap placement in the room needs careful planning, and the order of the blocks within the trap is also very deliberate. There are many online calculators which will export the quadratic solution that you need for construction of a skyline trap. I'm going to link up my matrix plus some other resources to save you some time in the video description. The 2 traps were placed vertically centered on the height of my mouth. That meant that within reason, if I spoke level with the ground towards the microphone, the traps would be most effective. The second trap at the back of the room would catch any stray waves that were able to escape the first. I started assembling the traps after building a simple frame to have them sit on. I took turns building the front and back traps, making sure that each layer would set before continuing. This was a very deliberate process that took 2 full days of my vacation to complete. Placing that last block in the last trap was very satisfying. The room also got carpet, some trim, and some lights. So closing off a fully double insulated room without any ventilation would be pretty dumb. I knew that eventually the room would become unbearable, however I also didn't want to start punching holes in a really nice wall. I needed a way to get air in the room without compromising the sound deadness of the wall. I built a furnace muffler out of a 3 foot long piece of 6 inch vent tube. I took the tube and lined it with pyramid foam. I tested it by yelling through it and I was very surprised by the results. It was exactly what I needed. The muffler brought quiet air into the room without compromising the wall. It was tied into the house HVAC and kept the room very cold and very quiet. The final product, the room, is in fact very isolated from the house and fully anechoic. We were 100% successful and I couldn't be happier with how it performs. The recorded audio is clean and it captures my voice exactly as it sounds. I no longer have the need to prepare anything to record. I can simply close the doors and I'm ready to go. Alright, so that's it. Thank you for sharing your time with me as I walked you through the build. I'm always pushing myself to improve my quality and presentation. I hope you found the video interesting. I know it won't be super popular because it's not my regular content. I needed to make it nonetheless. My goal is to grow my channel and I can't do that without the help of citizens like you. Please like and subscribe to help me get the word out about Star Citizen. Please link this video to a friend if you think they might find it interesting. Stay safe and I'll see you in the verse.